Welcome to the latest episode of To Boldly Pod. As most of you know that have listened to the audio version of this podcast over the past 9 seasons, you know I tend to do them all unscripted. I go into each podcast with a different idea and I just turn on the microphone and talk about it. And I thought to myself, now that you're going to start doing video podcasts, should you be a little more prepared? And then I thought, you know what? No, because I think that takes away from the spontaneity of what I want to talk about each and every episode. And again, for those that have been listening for the past 9 years, know that I have a wide range of things that interest me, that I like to talk about. And I don't want to come off sounding so smug and know-it-all, but yet I want to be able to come on the podcast and talk a little bit about what I want to talk about. And you all know I have a wide range of things that I like, from the paranormal and fringy topics to everyday life to social not so much social commentary, but maybe pop culture-ish would be kind of it, social culture-ish. But it also branches out into television and movies. And of course, you know, I have an undying love of science fiction. If you've listened to this podcast, you know I've talked a lot about Star Wars and Star Trek and Doctor Who, which is what we're going to talk about today, because I came across an article that got my panties in a bunch, as my mother used to say all the time. Never quite understood that. Must have been an old baby boomer phrase or something, getting your panties in your bunch, meaning you're angry or upset or kerfuffled, verklempt, whatever terminology you want to choose to use. But this article that I'm going to talk about, I've been debating on how I wanted to do it, because I don't want to read it word for word. I don't want to kind of dissect every single one. So I thought I would sort of pick and choose which ones I wanted to talk about in the article. And the article is a very simply put article. It's clearly a clickbaity article, but it clickbaited me, all right. And here it is, as you can sort of see. All 16 doctors' final adventure in Doctor Who before they regenerated, ranked. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And I'm not going to read the intro other than to kind of point out a couple of small little things. For those of you that maybe don't know, Time Lord is the main character, the species of the main character in Doctor Who. The Doctor is a Time Lord. That is his species. And they have the ability, when their lives come to an end, they don't die. They regenerate into a new body and a new incarnation of said Time Lord, in this case, the Doctor. And the one thing I wanted to point out is down here at the bottom, where it says, here they are, ranked in story quality, emotional impact, and that last word is important, legacy. So this person that wrote this article ranked them all from what they deem as the worst to the best. as far as story quality, which I get that part. Sometimes you don't like a story, then you would rank that near the bottom. Emotional impact, which most Doctor episodes have a little bit of an emotional impact. And as we're going to learn over the next half an hour, is you really don't get some emotional impact on some of them. But that last word, legacy, because that's important. And we're going to find that out as I scroll on with this entire diatribe. So let us kick things off at his bottom of the barrel, and as the 8th Doctor from 1996. And if you don't know, the 8th Doctor technically only appeared in one TV-made movie, which was a backdoor pilot, an agreement made between the BBC and the Fox network here in America in the mid-1990s to sort of bring Doctor Who, which had been canceled in 1989, to bring it here to America. So they made a backdoor pilot, meaning they made this movie, and it didn't fare well. Didn't fare well here, and it didn't fare well in England as well. So clearly, the series was not picked up by Fox nor the BBC to relaunch Doctor Who. So Doctor Who wouldn't officially relaunch again on the BBC until 2005. And we all know the story that Russell Davies restarted it in 2005, and it's still been going since then. But as a whole, Doctor Who has been around since 1961. And I get why he has the 8th Doctor at the bottom of the list. Because in the movie, you don't see him regenerate. And it's just sort of, I guess the best way to put it was assumed that he regenerated in 2005 when we got the rebirth of Doctor Who after a 16-year hiatus, save for this movie. And we never really got to see it until 2011 when a short was made to correspond with the anniversary, the 35th anniversary of Doctor Who. And that's kind of how they did it. They filmed this little short with Paul McGann, who played the Doctor, and he was setting up to transform into what we all expected when it rebooted as Christopher Eccleston's Doctor or the 9th Doctor, but he doesn't. He regenerates into the War Doctor. More about that in a little bit if you don't know exactly who or what the War Doctor is. So, his was kind of emotional in 2011 when they shot the short of Paul McGann regenerating into the War Doctor. So, but I understand why that one's at the bottom. I'm not going to read word for word all of the articles. The next one I kind of take a little umbrage with, and people will understand why. And that is because the 3rd Doctor is my favorite Doctor. And the part of the article, as you could read at the bottom, it says, the drawn-out 6-part finale. That's the way they did stories in the 60s and 70s. They were either real short 2-part stories, or they were 4, 6, 8, or even 10-parters, which we're going to get to in a little bit. They were like 22 minutes each episode, and they would join together into what they called a serial, a complete giant story arc in a little mini fashion. Well, this person doesn't like, he called it campy. It was the 70s. You have to keep in mind special effects in the 60s, 70s, and 80s weren't even a glimmer of what they have in today's TV and movie making. So, of course, in a relatively low budget TV show, and I say that meaning compared to big movies at the time, TV shows didn't have that humongous special effects budget, so they kind of had to improvise. A lot of times they suffered effects for writing and for acting. So something that had to kind of take a back seat was the effects. You had to suspend your belief and let the story soak into your imagination, more so than today when we get to see things almost with all the CGI and everything, and almost you can believe that what the actors are doing is actually real. But he didn't like the third Doctor's Regeneration because he thought the story was too long and too campy. The story does have some campy moments in it, and as we will talk about on this entire thing, some of the 60s and 70s and even 80s episodes do tend to get a little long because of the aforementioned, 4, 6, 8, or even 10-part stories. That's how they had to fill a whole season back then. Back then, seasons didn't consist of 8 to 13 episodes. Sometimes they went as high as 30 episodes. The first episode, or the first season of Star Trek, for example, had 27 episodes in it. That'd be unheard of today for a science fiction TV show. But I had no issue. I thought there was a lot of emotion involved when John Pertwee finally regenerated into Tom Baker at the end of Planet of the Spiders. So I don't get why he has this one way down at the bottom. But I'm probably biased since Pertwee is my favorite Doctor. The 15th Doctor, or the latest Doctor, I kind of understand why he has this one so far down on the list, because we're sort of left wondering what is all going on with this, because we saw him regenerate into a former companion, or regenerate into Rose. Now, I will say, as far as the story and the emotional impact, I thought it did a great job. The only thing that was left questioning or have us all scratching our head is him regenerating into Rose Tyler at the very end. So we're wondering about that. What's going on with it? And I'm assuming it's going to be some kind of storyline pertaining to the next Christmas special, which won't air for another year. But that's a story for another day. But I get why he has this one so far down. The story was fantastic, though. Mixing in the Ronnie and everything with a whole season-long story arc was just fantastic. And I couldn't have been happier with it. Now, this is the one where I take the most contention about, and why I wanted to come on here and record this. Third from the bottom, the regeneration of the second Doctor. And he goes on in the little explanation talking about how it was way too long. It was a 10-part serial to end his final season. It was called War Games, and it was very, very long, to which point the BBC actually did, just last year, I believe, cut it down to a 2-hour special they're selling on BBC iPlayer, and I think it's on Blu-ray now, and did some modern day enhancements to the regeneration. But this regeneration out of all of them is the single most important one in the 60 plus years of Doctor Who. That's why it shocks me that he has it so low. And in the article, he talks about how slow and drawn out the story was. And then you can see at the very bottom, he said, it did introduce the Time Lords properly to the Doctor Who canon. Time Lords, of course, are the Doctor's species. Before that, they just called him an alien. He never said he was a Time Lord. He never said he was from Gallifrey. None of that until this episode, where we finally got to meet his species, the Time Lords. And this episode alone set forth the canon for regeneration and his species for the rest of the series to this day. So to have this regeneration as low as it is kind of a slap in the face to people that are serious fans of Doctor Who. And I'm only assuming he has it ranked so low because it was part of such a long serial. Because the importance of the second Doctor, Patrick Troughton's regeneration, is head and shoulders above everyone else's as far as canon goes. So I don't really understand why this author has this so low. The next one is the 14th Doctor, which it is what it is. We knew David Tennant was coming back for the 60th anniversary, and you kind of had to do something with his regeneration into Ncuti. So what were they going to do? Well, they did the typical thing, since David Tennant, and I have nothing against him, he's one of the best doctors out there. So before I say what I'm about to say, don't get butthurt about it. But he does have this, he keeps coming back as the Doctor. We saw him in the anniversary episode with Matt Smith. Then we saw him in this one. But this time, Russell Davies did something different. He reintroduced something new. And I'm wondering if it was a case of not wanting to totally write off David Tennant as playing the Doctor. Because when he regenerated here, he didn't regenerate, he bigenerated, which means he split in two. So somewhere out there in the universe, we still have this 14th Doctor hanging out with Donna Noble and her family, where Ncuti went on to be the Doctor that we all know. As far as the bigeneration goes, will anything ever come of it? I don't know, because we saw the Ronnie do that in Ncuti regeneration episode, so maybe it's going to become part of lore. Time will tell.